In the vast expanse of the Persian Empire, which stretched from India to Ethiopia, reigned King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I. He was a man proud of his power and riches, and he wanted to show all his princes, governors, and nobles the greatness of his kingdom. The king commanded, "Let everyone see the magnificence of my empire. Prepare a banquet such as has never been seen." The servants hurried from one place to another, decorating the palace courtyards with white, blue, and purple linen, supported by marble columns. They set out cups of pure gold, each one different, and filled the tables with exquisite delicacies. For 180 days, the princes and nobles enjoyed the feast. Laughter filled the halls, wine flowed without measure, and the king was pleased to see how everyone admired his power. The air in the fortress of Susa was thick with the aroma of exotic spices and sweet wine. Hundreds of torches flickered, making the marble walls and the gold threads of the tapestry shine like stars. In the center of it all, upon a throne of ivory and gold, sat the most powerful man in the world, King Ahasuerus. The banquet had already been going on for 7 days. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with joy and wine. He raised his solid gold cup, so heavy he needed both hands. King Ahasuerus shouted with a loud and resonant voice, "Drink, my princes! Drink, men of Persia and Media! Never has there been a kingdom as glorious as ours." The crowd roared in approval, but the king was not finished. His mind, clouded by pride, had an idea. He wanted everyone to see the most precious jewel in his collection, his wife, Queen Vashti. He turned to the 7 eunuchs who stood beside him, their faces pale and nervous under the king's intense gaze. King Ahasuerus, with a clear and resounding order, "Harbona, Bigtha, you, go to the queen's chambers. Tell Vashti that her king summons her. Bring her before me, wearing the royal crown, so that the peoples and the princes may behold her beauty, for she is the most beautiful of all." The eunuchs bowed quickly and rushed out of the hall. The crowd murmured with anticipation. Meanwhile, in another hall of the palace, Queen Vashti was presiding over her own banquet for the women. The atmosphere there was calmer, filled with the soft music of harps and delicate conversations. When the king's agitated eunuchs entered, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Harbona, the chief eunuch, approached the queen. Harbona said with a trembling voice, "My queen, King Ahasuerus requests your presence. He commands that you come to the men's banquet to display your beauty." Vashti's eyes widened. The blood drained from her face, to be exhibited like a trophy before drunken men. The request was not just strange, it was a humiliation. She stood up, her figure tall and dignified. She looked at the eunuchs, and her voice, though low, was as firm as steel. Queen Vashti said, with a calm but unwavering voice, "Tell the king that I refuse to go." The answer echoed in the silence. The eunuchs could not believe what they were hearing. They returned to the king's hall, terror painted on their faces. The king, seeing them arrive alone, stopped laughing. The music seemed to fade away. The entire hall held its breath. With his head bowed, Harbona relayed the queen's response. A deathly silence took hold of the place. King Ahasuerus' face went from the red of joy to the purple of fury. He gripped his golden cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and then, with a roar, he smashed it against the floor. Did you know? In ancient Persia, the king's word was absolute and irrevocable law. The queen's disobedience, especially in a public act, was not just a personal insult, but was considered a direct threat to the foundation of power and the social order of the empire. Queen Vashti made a very brave decision that had great consequences. Do you think she did the right thing in defending her dignity? Before we continue, give this a like if you want more people to know this story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming biblical adventures. And don't forget to share this video with your friends or with someone who needs to learn from the Word of God. The echo of the shattered cup resounded in the great hall, leaving behind an even heavier silence. King Ahasuerus gasped, his chest heaving violently. His closest counselors exchanged nervous glances, knowing that the king's anger was like an uncontrollable storm. Finally, Marduk, the eldest and most respected of his 7 counselors, dared to speak, his voice low but respectful. "Oh, great king, your majesty must consider the consequences of this act. If Queen Vashti dares to disobey the king, all the women of the empire will be emboldened to look down upon their husbands. Respect and order in our homes will crumble. We must send a royal decree to all the provinces, announcing that Vashti has been deposed and that her example must not be followed. Thus, all women will honor their husbands, from the noblest to the humblest." The king listened attentively, his fury beginning to yield to the logic of Marduk's words. The idea of an empire in disarray due to Vashti's disobedience deeply troubled him. He ran a trembling hand through his beard and nodded slowly. King Ahasuerus, his voice still hoarse with anger but more controlled, said, "You are right, Marduk. We cannot allow the insubordination of one queen to sow anarchy throughout my entire kingdom. Let a royal decree be prepared. Let it be written in every language and sent to every corner of the empire. Let it be declared that Queen Vashti has lost her crown for disobeying her king's command, and that another woman, more worthy and obedient, be chosen to take her place." Immediately, the royal scribes set to work. Quills danced across parchments. Royal seals were stamped with firmness. Messengers on horseback prepared to ride at full speed, carrying the news through valleys and mountains, across deserts and plains. The king's decree was irrevocable. Vashti's fate was sealed, and the empire prepared for a new era, unaware that a young Jewish woman named Esther would soon play a crucial role in its history. Did you know? Royal decrees in the Persian Empire were considered immutable. Once a king signed and sealed an edict, not even he himself could change it. This firmness in their decisions was seen as a sign of the empire's authority and stability. Do you think the king's decision to dismiss Vashti was a just one? Time passed, and with it, the king's burning anger turned into a cold ash of regret. In the solitude of his vast halls, Ahasuerus often remembered Vashti, her beauty and spirit, and the harsh decision he had made. His servants, seeing him so disheartened, grew concerned. One of them, with great tact, approached him. "Your Majesty, the past cannot be changed, but the future is bright. Let us find a new light for your kingdom. Let your officers search all the provinces for the most beautiful and virtuous young women." The idea sparked a small flicker of interest in the king. Thus, the decree to find a new queen was set in motion. The news flew throughout the empire, reaching every city and village. And in that very city of Susa lived a Jewish man of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai. He had raised his orphaned cousin, Hadassah, whom everyone called Esther, as if she were his own daughter. Esther was as good and kind as she was beautiful, and Mordecai loved her deeply. When the king's guards arrived at their home, Mordecai's heart sank. He knew he couldn't object. As Esther prepared, he took her aside and with a look full of love and concern, whispered a vital command. Mordecai said in a low and serious voice, "Esther, my child, when you get to the palace, do not reveal to anyone that you are Jewish. Do not speak of our people or your family. Be wise, be prudent, and above all, be good. Trust in God." Esther nodded, holding her cousin's words deep in her heart. With a mixture of nervousness and a strange calm, she was taken along with many other young women to the royal palace, a completely new and dazzling world. Did you know? The preparation process for a young woman to be presented to the Persian king was very long and luxurious. It included 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with special perfumes and cosmetics. Esther had to leave her home to go to an unknown place. Have you ever had to do something that made you a little scared, but you knew it was necessary? The house of the women was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of courtyards with fountains, secret gardens, and halls adorned with silks and cushions of 1,000 colors. All the selected young women were placed under the care of a man named Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem. Haggai was a man of great responsibility. He had seen hundreds of young women come and go and knew exactly what the king was looking for. His gaze was serious and assessing. One by one, the young women passed before him, some with haughty looks, others with shyness. When it was Esther's turn, she didn't try to impress. She simply presented herself with a humility and natural grace that distinguished her from all the others. There was no arrogance in her eyes, only a serene kindness. Upon seeing her, Haggai's stern expression softened. Immediately, Esther found favor in his sight. Haggai saw something special in her, something beyond simple beauty. Without hesitation, he decided to give her preferential treatment. Haggai, in a kind but firm voice, said, "Give this young woman the best quarters. Quickly. Bring her beauty treatments and the special portion of food that comes from the king's table. And choose the 7 best maidens in the palace to serve her exclusively." As Esther was led to her luxurious rooms, she remembered Mordecai's words and kept her secret safely in her heart. No one knew that within the walls of that Persian palace was a young Jewish woman. And every day, without fail, her beloved cousin Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the courtyard of the house of the women, anxiously waiting to know how Esther was and what her fate would be. Did you know? Eunuchs like Haggai were figures of immense power and trust in ancient courts. As they couldn't have families of their own, their loyalty was entirely dedicated to the king, which is why they were entrusted with the monarch's greatest treasures, his money and his harem. Esther gained Haggai's favor by being humble and kind. How does being kind and respectful to others help us in our daily lives? As Esther adapted to her new life in the palace, her cousin Mordecai had obtained an official post and habitually sat at the king's gate, a bustling place where all important matters of the kingdom passed. His ears were always attentive, and his loyalty to the king was absolute. One day, while at his post, he noticed 2 of the king's highest-ranking eunuchs, named Bigthan and Teres, who guarded the entrance to the royal chambers. They spoke in low voices, with frowns on their faces, and Mordecai saw a shadow of hatred in their eyes. Bigthan, in a whispering voice, I can't stand it anymore. The king has disdained us for the last time. Teres, with an equally resentful voice, replied, I agree. We must act. Tonight, while he sleeps, we will put an end to his reign. Mordecai froze. They were planning to take the king's life. He knew he had to act quickly and discreetly. Instead of raising his voice and causing a panic, he found a way to send an urgent, secret message to the person he trusted most in the world, Queen Esther. When Esther read her cousin's message, she understood the seriousness of the situation. Without delay, she requested an audience with the king. Esther, in a serious and respectful voice, before the king said, My lord and king, I have been informed of a matter of utmost urgency. A man loyal to you, Mordecai, who sits at your gate, has discovered a terrible plot. 2 of your own guards, Bigthan and Teres, are planning to harm you. King Ahasuerus' face darkened. Immediately, he ordered an investigation. The accusation was confirmed. The 2 eunuchs confessed their plan. The king's justice was swift and severe. But the most important thing was what happened next. The king, impressed by Mordecai's loyalty, commanded, Let this act be recorded in the book of the Chronicles of the kingdom. Write that Mordecai the Jew saved the king's life. I want it to be on record forever. And so, Mordecai's brave and loyal action was written in the official history of the empire, a deed that at the time seemed small, but whose echo would resonate with incredible force in the future. Did you know? The King's Gate was not just an entrance, but the center of civic and judicial life in many ancient cities. It was like the town hall and the courts, all in one place. Sitting at the gate meant that a person had authority and was a respected judge or official. Esther gave Mordecai credit for saving the king. Why is it good to acknowledge the good deeds of others? The 12 months of preparation came to an end. One by one, each young woman was called to spend a night with King Ahasuerus. Each could ask for anything she wanted from the house of the women to take with her. The most dazzling jewels, the finest dresses, the most exotic perfumes. They all tried to impress the king with opulence and adornments. Finally, it was Esther's turn. Haggai, the eunuch who so appreciated her, approached her. Esther, it's your moment. What do you wish to take with you to the king? Esther looked at him with her usual calm. She didn't ask for a single piece of jewelry or an extravagant dress. Trusting in Haggai's wisdom and her own natural grace, she answered simply. Esther, in a soft and clear voice, said, I will take only what you advise me to, Haggai. I trust your judgment. Haggai smiled, moved by her humility and confidence. He dressed her in royal clothes that enhanced her beauty without overshadowing it, simple yet incredibly elegant. Thus, without the burden of gold and gems, Esther was led to the king's chambers. When Ahasuerus saw her enter, the world's bustle seemed to fade away. He didn't see a young woman trying to dazzle him, but a presence filled with a grace and a light that no jewel could equal. The king was instantly captivated, and the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she found grace and favor in his sight more than all the other maidens. The king's heart, which had been closed since Vashti's departure, was now completely open. Without a moment's hesitation, he rose from his seat, took the royal crown, and with a tenderness that surprised everyone present, gently placed it on Esther's head. He had chosen her. The young Jewish orphan was now the queen of the vast Persian Empire. Did you know? The crown worn by Persian kings was not a simple metal circlet. It was often a heavy fabric tiara, adorned with an immense number of pearls and jewels, and it was said to be so heavy that it had to be suspended by a gold chain from the ceiling above the king's head. Unlike the others, Esther did not ask for luxurious jewels or dresses. What does this teach us about true beauty? To celebrate his new queen, King Ahasuerus held a banquet even grander and more splendid than the previous ones. This would be the Banquet of Esther. Invitations were sent to all the princes and servants of the empire. The palace was once again filled with laughter, music, and joy. In the place of honor, beside the king, sat Queen Esther, her serene face radiating a light that was contagious to all. The king was so happy that his generosity knew no bounds. With a great smile, he stood up and raised his cup. In honor of my queen, Queen Esther, today is a day of celebration throughout the empire. Therefore, I declare a day of rest for all provinces and grant a tax reduction. May everyone rejoice with me. The crowd cheered enthusiastically. The king generously distributed gifts, and the feast continued with great joy. In the midst of all the celebration, Esther never forgot who she was or where she came from. She enjoyed the honor, but her heart remained humble, always remembering her cousin Mordecai's advice. And though she was now the most powerful woman in the empire next to the king, to Mordecai, who watched from the gate, she was still his beloved Hadassah. Esther had not revealed her secret. No one in the Persian court knew that their queen, the light of the king's eyes, was Jewish. For now, it was a secret kept between her, Mordecai, and God. Did you know? A king's generosity, such as giving gifts or lowering taxes, a very rare and significant act, was a crucial way to demonstrate power and earn the loyalty and affection of the people. By doing this in Esther's name, Ahasuerus was publicly elevating his new queen's status to a very high level. Esther was now a powerful queen, but she still listened to Mordecai's wise advice. Why is it important to continue listening to the people who love us, no matter how great we become? After the great celebration, a new character quickly rose in the king's court. His name was Haman. For reasons of his own, King Ahasuerus decided to honor Haman above all the princes and officials who served him. He gave him the position of highest authority after his own, and to solidify his power, he issued a new command. Let all my servants, from the highest to the lowest, kneel and pay homage to Haman whenever he passes. This is the king's order. And so it was. Wherever Haman walked, with his chest puffed out with pride and his extravagant clothes, the king's servants would prostrate themselves face down. Haman immensely enjoyed this power, drinking in the submission of everyone. But every day, at the king's gate, there was one man who did not kneel, one who stood, silently and with respect, but upright. It was Mordecai. The other officials, bewildered, approached him. Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Don't you fear Haman's wrath? Mordecai, in a calm but firm voice, said, I honor the king, but I am a Jew, and my faith teaches me to kneel only before my God. At first, Haman didn't notice. But when the other officials, to cause trouble for Mordecai, pointed him out, Haman's gaze fixed on him. Day after day, he saw Mordecai standing, defying the homage he so loved. A cold, dark anger began to grow in Haman's heart. It wasn't just an insult. To his pride, it was an intolerable act of rebellion. And in that darkness, a terrible idea began to form. Did you know? The Bible describes Haman as an Agagite, or a descendant of Agag. Agag was the king of the Amalekites, an ancient and bitter enemy of the people of Israel. This detail explains why Haman's hatred didn't stop with Mordecai, but extended to all the Jews. It was a historical and ancestral hatred. Mordecai stood firm in his beliefs, even though he was the only person who did. Have you ever had to stand up for what you believe is right, even if others didn't? Haman's rage burned inside him like a dark fire. Every time he saw Mordecai, he felt a pang of hatred. But in his immense pride, he thought that punishing a single man was too small an act for someone of his greatness. When his servants informed him that Mordecai was Jewish, a much more terrible and expansive idea took hold of his mind. He decided that he would not only destroy Mordecai, but he would annihilate his entire people, every Jewish man, woman, and child throughout the Persian Empire. For Haman, everything had to be done with an air of solemnity. Therefore, in his presence, lots were cast, which in Persian is called pur, to determine the perfect day and month for his terrible plan. The lots fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. With the date set by fate, Haman went before the king. My great king, there is a certain people scattered throughout all the provinces of your kingdom whose laws are different from everyone else's. They do not obey the king's laws, and it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I myself will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the king's treasuries to compensate for any loss. King Ahasuerus, blindly trusting his second in command, and without asking what people he was talking about, did not hesitate. He took off his signet ring, the symbol of his absolute authority, and gave it to Haman. King Ahasuerus said to him, "The silver is yours, and the people as well, to do with them as you see best." With the king's ring on his finger, Haman now had the power to turn his hatred into law. The die was cast, the decree was about to be written, and a shadow of death loomed over the Jews, who were living in peace, unaware of the terrible fate that had been sealed for them. Did you know? The 10,000 talents of silver that Haman offered was an astronomical sum. Historians estimate it could have been the equivalent of 2/3 of the annual income of the entire Persian Empire. This shows Haman's incredible wealth and the depth of his hatred, as he was willing to pay a fortune to carry out his revenge. The king made a terrible decision without thinking and without asking questions. What does this teach us about the importance of thinking before acting? The messengers departed in great haste, driven by the king's command. The decree, written in every language and for every people, was sent to the 127 provinces of the empire. The message was brutal and explicit. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, all Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be exterminated and all their possessions plundered. While the king and Haman sat drinking, celebrating their agreement, the city of Susa was plunged into confusion and bewilderment. When Mordecai learned of everything that had been decreed, his world collapsed. In an act of deep despair, he tore his official robes, put on rough sackcloth, and covered his head with ashes. He went out into the middle of the city, crying out to heaven with a loud and bitter lament that broke the soul. He came to the palace gate but could not enter, for no one was allowed to pass the king's gate dressed in mourning. And his grief was not solitary. As the messengers arrived in each province, the same scene of horror was repeated. Wherever the news reached, there was great mourning among the Jews. Fasting, weeping, and lamenting were heard in every home. Sackcloth and ashes became the bed of many. The joy of an entire people had in an instant turned into the deepest and darkest of sorrows. Mordecai, with a great lament, exclaimed, "O our God! Why? Why has this evil fallen upon your people? Did you know?" Dressing in sackcloth and ashes was the most extreme way to show mourning and repentance in the ancient East. Sackcloth was a very rough and uncomfortable fabric, often made of black goat hair. Putting ashes on one's head symbolized desolation and the recognition that without God's help, we are nothing but dust. Fasting and prayer were how the Jews asked God for help in their time of greatest need. What do we do when we feel very worried or scared? Inside the golden walls of the palace, Queen Esther lived unaware of the terror that had been unleashed. But when her maids and eunuchs came to her with pale, worried faces, they told her of Mordecai's strange behavior. "He is at the king's gate, dressed in sackcloth and ashes," they said. Deeply distressed, Esther sent him fine clothes to wear, but he refused them. Mordecai's mourning was too profound to be covered with silk. Confused and with a bad feeling, Esther called for Hatak, one of the king's trusted eunuchs. She ordered him. Esther, in a voice full of concern, said to him, "Go to Mordecai, Hatak. Find out what is happening to him and why he is so distressed. I will not rest until I know." Hatak went to the city square, where he found Mordecai, who told him everything: Haman's conspiracy, the immense sum of money promised, and the exact content of the death decree. He gave Hatak a copy of the terrible edict to show to Esther, and gave him a message that would change the course of history. Tell Esther not to think that because she is in the palace, she will escape with her life. If she remains silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but she and her father's house will perish. And tell her this: who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? When Hatak returned and gave the message to Esther, she felt an icy fear run through her body. Presenting herself to the king without being summoned meant death. But Mordecai's words resonated in her soul. She realized that her crown and her palace were not a refuge, but a platform. Her purpose was greater than her own safety. After a moment of intense deliberation, her fear was transformed into a steel-like resolve. She sent her final answer to Mordecai. Esther, in a firm voice filled with a new courage, answered him, "Go and gather all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and 3 nights. My maidens and I will do the same. And after that, even though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. And if I perish, I perish." Did you know? The phrase, "for such a time as this," is one of the most famous in the Bible. It has become a powerful reminder that people are often placed in positions of influence not by chance, but for a specific purpose to face the challenges of their time. Esther had to choose between her own safety and the safety of her people. What does her decision teach us about courage? On the 3rd day, the fast ended. A change came over Esther. She put aside her prayer and penitence and rose with a clear purpose. With the help of her maids, she dressed in her most splendid royal garments. She did not present herself as a desperate supplicant, but as the queen she was. radiant, and majestic. With each piece of silk and every jewel, she armed her courage for the battle she was about to fight. She took a deep breath and walked alone down the imposing marble hallways, her heart beating hard against her ribs. Each step was an echo in the palace's silence. Finally, she reached the entrance of the throne room and stopped in the inner courtyard, in plain sight of the king. Ahasuerus was seated on his royal throne, facing the entrance. The law was absolute. No one could come before him without being summoned. For an instant, time stood still. The king looked up and saw her. He saw his queen, more beautiful than ever, but with a paleness and an urgency in her eyes that he had never seen before. His frown, furrowed by the interruption, softened. The love he felt for her overcame the rigid law of the court. Slowly, he extended the long golden scepter he held in his hand towards her. It was the sign. It was life. With a sigh of immense relief, Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king spoke to her, his voice full of affection. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your petition? Even to half of the kingdom, it will be granted to you." But Esther, with incredible wisdom, did not reveal her distress. She knew that the time and place had to be perfect. Esther, in a serene voice, replied, "If it pleases your majesty, my petition is that the king and also Haman come today to the special banquet I have prepared for you." The king, delighted, immediately agreed. That afternoon, in a private and elegant dining room, the three of them sat. Haman could barely contain his pride to be the only guest at the queen's intimate banquet. During dinner, the king, sensing there was something more, asked again. But Esther, weaving her web with mastery, only smiled and invited them to a second banquet the next day, promising that then, finally, she would reveal her request. Haman left that night feeling like the luckiest and most powerful man in the empire, unaware that the queen had just set the stage for his downfall. Did you know? The scepter has been a symbol of royal authority for thousands of years. In Persia, extending it was not just a gesture of forgiveness, but a renewal of life for the person who had broken protocol. By touching it, Esther was symbolically accepting the king's power and mercy over her life. Esther did not reveal her whole problem at once. Instead, she waited for the perfect moment. Why is it sometimes wise to be patient and wait for the right time to speak? Haman left the queen's banquet with his heart overflowing with joy and pride. He felt on top of the world. But as he passed the king's gate, his euphoria evaporated like water in the desert. There was Mordecai, and he did not bow. Haman's joy turned into a black rage. He ran home, and gathering his wife Zeresh and his friends, he boasted of his wealth, his sons, and above all, the honor of being the only guest at the queen's feast. But all this means nothing to me, as long as I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate. Zeresh, his wife, said in a cold voice, "The problem has an easy solution. Have a gallows built, a very tall one, 75 feet high. In the morning, simply ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on it. Then you can go happily to the queen's banquet." Haman loved the idea. Immediately, he ordered the gallows to be built. But that very night, an unexpected turn of fate was set in motion. In the palace, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, his mind restless. To distract himself, he gave an order. "Bring me the book of the Chronicles, the records of the kingdom, and read to me." A servant brought the heavy book and began to read. He read about battles, about taxes, and suddenly he read the passage about how two eunuchs, Bigthan and Teres, had conspired against the king, and how a man named Mordecai had discovered the plot and saved the king's life. The king sat upright. King Ahasuerus, in an intrigued voice, said, "Wait, what honor or reward was given to Mordecai for this?" "My king, nothing was done for him." Just then, footsteps were heard. Haman had arrived early at court, anxious to ask for permission to hang Mordecai on his new gallows. The king asked who was in the courtyard, and upon learning it was Haman, had him brought in. Without giving him time to speak, the king asked him a question. "Haman, what should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman's heart soared with pride. "Who else would the king want to honor but me?" he thought. And he described the greatest honor he could imagine: dressing the man in the king's robes, having him ride the king's personal horse, and having the noblest prince lead him through the city, shouting, "This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor." The king smiled. The idea was perfect. "Wonderful. Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do all that for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not omit a single detail." Haman's face went white. Horror and humiliation flooded over him. Trapped by his own words, the proud Haman had to take the royal robes, dress his worst enemy, and lead him on horseback through the city, shouting in a choked voice the honor he had wanted for himself. Fate had taken a spectacular turn. Did you know? The king being unable to sleep is considered by many to be the turning point of the entire story. It's seen as a divine intervention, a small event that changes everything. It shows that, while Haman was confident in his power and his plans, a greater force was moving the pieces to protect Esther's people. Haman planned something very bad for Mordecai, but in the end, it happened to himself. What does this teach us about wishing evil on others? Haman ran home after the parade, covering his head as a sign of deep shame. He told his wife and friends about the terrible humiliation he had suffered. While he was still speaking, his wife said to him with a shiver in her voice, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail. You will certainly fall before him." She had barely finished speaking when the king's eunuchs arrived at his door. There was no time to lament. They had to take him quickly to the banquet that Esther had prepared. The atmosphere at the second banquet was electric. Haman, who the day before had been overflowing with pride, now sat with a knot of dread in his stomach. The king, knowing this was the moment, looked at Esther. "Now, Queen Esther, what is your petition? Your request? Up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther took a deep breath, her voice trembling at first, but strengthening with each word. "Oh, my king, if I have found favor in your sight, my petition is that you grant me my life, and my request is that you save my people. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king jumped up, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. He had signed a decree, yes, but against just any people, not against his own queen. King Ahasuerus said in a voice of thunder, "Who is he? And where is the one who has dared to do such a thing?" All eyes were on Esther. She raised her arm and pointed directly across the table. "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Haman's world collapsed. He stood pale, paralyzed with terror, as the furious gaze of the king and the accusing gaze of the queen pierced him. Unable to contain his rage, the king got up and walked abruptly into the palace garden to calm down. Haman, knowing he was condemned, desperately threw himself at Esther's feet, falling onto the couch where she was reclining, pleading for his life. At that very instant, the king returned. Seeing Haman on the queen's couch, he misinterpreted it in the worst way. Will he also attempt to force the queen in my own house, in front of me? With those words, Haman's fate was sealed. The guards stepped forward and covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs, spoke. Your Majesty, the 75-foot gallows that Haman prepared for Mordecai, the man who saved your life, is standing next to his house. King Ahasuerus, with a final and terrible command, replied, hang him on it. And so, the man who had planned the destruction of an entire people was taken and executed on the very gallows he had built for his enemy. Did you know? Covering a prisoner's face in the ancient Persian court was a very powerful symbolic act. It meant that the condemned person was no longer worthy of seeing the king's face. The moment the guards covered Haman's face, everyone in the room knew there was no chance of appeal or pardon. Esther finally revealed the truth, even though it was very risky. Why is it so important to have the courage to tell the truth, especially when there is an injustice? Haman had fallen, but his wicked decree was still the law throughout the empire, and a Persian law, once sealed by the king, could not be revoked. With her heart still in anguish, Esther came before the king once more, falling at his feet and weeping. She pleaded with him to find a way to nullify the terrible plan that threatened her people. The king, moved by her tears, once again extended the golden scepter to her. He gave Haman's house to Esther and gave Mordecai the signet ring he had taken from the traitor. I cannot revoke the first decree, but I give you my authority. Use my ring and write a new decree in my name. Seal it and do whatever is necessary to save your people. Hope was reborn. Mordecai, now clothed with the king's power, summoned the scribes. A new decree was written in haste, a law that granted the Jews in every city the right to gather and defend their lives on the 13th day of the month of Adar. The messengers rode out once more, but this time they carried news of life and hope. Wherever the decree arrived, the sadness of the Jews turned into overflowing joy. There was feasting and celebration. And Mordecai came out from the king's presence wearing royal robes of blue and white, a large golden crown, and a mantle of linen and purple. The entire city of Susa shouted for joy. When the appointed day arrived, the Jews bravely defended themselves against those who sought to harm them, and they were victorious. Their mourning had turned into dancing. To commemorate this incredible deliverance from annihilation, Esther and Mordecai established an annual feast. They called it Purim, in remembrance of the pur, the lot, that Haman had cast to destroy them. They decreed that these days would be remembered and celebrated by all generations as days of feasting and joy, of exchanging gifts, and of giving to the poor. And so, thanks to the courage of a brave queen and the faithfulness of her cousin, the weeping of an entire people was transformed into celebration. Darkness was overcome by light, and their story became an eternal reminder that even in the darkest night, hope can be born and destiny can take a marvelous turn. And that is the incredible story of Queen Esther, a story of courage, faith, and the triumph of good over evil. It teaches us that one person, no matter how small they feel, can make a huge difference. If you enjoyed this story and it inspired your family, we would love for you to join ours. Like this video so that more families can find and enjoy it. And don't forget to click the subscribe button on our channel, Bible Cartoons TV, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any of our future animated Bible adventures, told especially for you and your family. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next story.